right? And so that's one of the reasons why this buyer-supplier mixer is taking place today, right? Now, this is an opportunity to try to build some of those connections between small producers and institutional buyers. Uh-oh, it looks like we lost, I think we just lost Ileana. Hang on 1 second, let me. Is she coming? Hang on. Maybe I'll go ahead and end. Just present from my screen. Once she gets back on, I'll get her back in here. Okay. Oh, there she is. Sorry, my co-host disappeared. Ileana, you're back with us? She might still be coming in. Okay. All right. So just picking back up. So lack of scale, infrastructure, and connections. From the other side, we analyzed what 5 city institutions, so CPS, the Parks, the Department of Family and Social Services, JTDC, the hospitals and the jails, were purchasing or are currently purchasing. And this snapshot looks at their purchases by cost, by month. And so we find that only 7% of current purchasing goes to specialty crops. The majority, so a little less than half, is spent on value-added products or animal products. If we look at the level of preparation that's needed, we see that only 5% of the things that they're purchasing are raw, right? So in their native form, and that the majority of what's being spent on are value-added products that are cooked, that might be frozen, that need a minimal level of preparation when they get to the institution. So they're really able to serve them directly. So this kind of triggered for us that if like food hubs want to service the needs of institutions, they're really going to need to provide processing and food preparation services in addition to kind of raw crops. So just kind of looking at what the marketplace look like, currently we see that small producers might sell directly to markets or consumers, where the larger producers are selling to food service companies who then sell to institutions. And so there's this barrier that small producers face, related to volume, having the right certifications, having adequate resources, and these network connections. So the idea of a food hub is that we can aggregate food from many small producers in order to meet multiple needs, both of the institutions as well as individual households. But food hubs need to be flexible in scale. They have to have community support. And we need to think about how do we center Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the infrastructure. There are a couple of different models that we might have. So a large food hub with all of the services provided under one roof, more decentralized, where we have a cooperative network of micro food hubs across the city that have different services but are connected loosely, right? They might share information. They might share perhaps some facilities, but they're really operating independently. And in the middle, we have multiple locations that might have varied services, but are being coordinated through one organization. It's important to think about the different costs that are associated with operating a food hub. So we need to look at the facilities, where we're going to be located, whether it's going to be leased or rented or purchased, whether it's a repurposed space. and what size. We need to look at the equipment. If we need trucks, machines to do packaging and storage, right? So cold storage is really important. We need to factor in labor cost, certifications, and planning. And Ileana, I think that is what I have for my part of the presentation. And so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Wesley.
And I can let you share your screen, or would you like me to?
I can, if you don't mind driving. It's just a few slides. So, all right. Well, thank you again for having me here and sharing more about my experience. So I'm Eliana Pinilla, and I work with the Common Market, and we are a nonprofit aggregator and distributor. And what I'm hoping to share with you today is a little bit of the reflections that we've had over the last 12 months, and just share also a bit of what we do, how we've operated, and what we're hoping to bring about as we enter and join the region, and hopefully close out with some questions to the folks that join this breakout, and really more than anything enable a dialogue and hear from the folks hearing this information, their reactions, their perspectives. So just kind of like a collective reflection space. So with that, we can go into the next slide. So the Common Market, we essentially are focused on strengthening local economies. And the way that we do that is by enabling resources to be available for communities and organizations through some of our regional family farms, and making it possible for institutions, in our next slide, that are, it could be schools, universities, community organizations, to be able to have the opportunity to access fresh, nutritious food. So at the center of our work, we are focused on creating connection between those two parts of the system, our regional growers and our communities through institutional markets. Going into the next slide, it's more of a description of looking at what Wesley presented earlier, like what are the different ways that different food mobilizing approaches set up. For the Common Market, we've been operating for about 15 years. And the way that we've created our operation was based essentially out of like community organization. We, Tatiana and Hailey, had the opportunity at the time to create an urban agricultural community program. And in the process of creating that, they also saw how much of the need there was, not too far from Philadelphia, on agricultural communities that were having all this abundance of products, but they weren't getting that equitable price and appreciation for the products. And that's how that was born. So Philadelphia was the original hub. And as there was more need for this type of model to be present in nearby regions, we went into the Southeast and Texas, and then most recently, the Great Lakes. And the way that we achieve that is we have a centralized kind of shared enabling systems that we call the Commons, and they're based out of Philadelphia. And so, but the intrinsic operations of each hub are on location. We are working with folks in the region that know and or have had experience or are interested on like developing experience in this side of the work of aggregation and distribution. But a lot of the work that has to do with finance, marketing, and HR, we resource it out of one location. And how we operate is very similar to that line of work that we saw between, if we go to the previous slide, going from like regional small, medium farms. So we have about 300 sustainable farms that we work with. And we also are very focused from the beginning of our day of the Common Market is creating pathways for growers that not only are that environmentally, agriculturally centered, but also have not had traditionally the opportunity to participate in the markets that we support, which are mostly institutional markets. And the way we do that is really creating conversations and relationships with the growers and with the communities we serve and the institutions we serve, and find those matches. And so Wesley talked about finding opportunity on some of the different circumstances and finding the right channels for not only the growers and where they are, but also the capacity and ability that they feel comfortable with, as well with like the needs of either the community organization or the institution. So going into the next slide. So this is just like a little bit of a very 30,000 feet view of like what has been bringing this model, this approach to the Great Lakes. So a lot of my work has been previously in consumer packaged goods. I've been in the food system, and I was actually on my very early days, teenager, working on a farm in Colombia. So that's my love for agriculture has been born, and food has been born from that time, and came around the opportunity with the common market to join them about 9 months ago. And the vision is how can we become essentially bringing this model here, but in the context of building relationships and amplifying existing connections. And so the way we've done it is essentially joining those regional conversations, talking with different cohorts from organizations that are working on policy to organizations that are working on urban agriculture, working with growers in the Great Lakes region. So that includes the corners that are within 300 miles of the Chicago metro area, and then connecting with other hubs that are doing similar work and understanding what their capacity and capability and what could be the partnership, and identifying segments. So by that I mean like which are the areas, the institutions that would be interested, whether they are never had the opportunity to do local procurement and are interested, to the folks that are very much involved in it. So some of the general insights are not far from what Westlyn just shared, and definitely there's this ongoing work that it seems that it's never fast enough or soon enough of having the infrastructure of aggregation and cold storage. There's the other, depending on which part of the Great Lakes you are looking at, the market pathways are different, and the readiness to them are different based on where the availability to access the resources to have a GAP certification or the infrastructure to put even that forward is. And then I think one of the things that comes in perspective as I've talked of the other regions that we are part of, the Great Lakes is definitely a more strong and mature food system. And that's not saying that we don't have work to do, but there's a greater understanding of the impact of having self-reliant food system and what it can do to disenfranchised communities and growers that are looking to have living wage and good access to markets. So what does it look like in practice now after we looked at all these relationships? Well, our hope is that we can develop a specific market relationship and grower relationship that we can pilot what this model could look like, and hopefully we are able to do that before the end of the year. So going into our next slide, with this in mind, we'd love to open the conversation for those that have joined us in this breakout to really, go off mute or share through the chat more about, what are some of the challenges, whether grower or community member or distributor of establishing food mobilization operations.
I guess we could also ask if folks had any questions of us.
That's right.
As well, or were willing to share more broadly about some of the challenges that you face. And be curious who's in the room. And now I see a couple of folks from the Community Food Navigator.
Hi, um, Eliana, thank you so much. Bahati, Sydney, and I are here from the Community Food Navigator. We're serving as an organization to support Black, Brown, and Indigenous growers to connect and to network for greater visibility and sharing of information and resources. And one of the major focus areas, as you know well, Weslin and Dakari and many others who've been stewarding this project with us, is this topic of food mobilization and the defining terms by those doing work on the ground to do this in a community-driven way. So I understand that. I think part of the challenge is terminology, part of the challenge is time, and part of the challenge is determining, at least from our observations and what we've learned from folks, is understanding how this fits into who people want to be serving, how they want to keep value in place, so that there is a good mix of both potentially institutional procurement if one is interested, but also could be solely community driven and directed. And so I think that's part of huge opportunity, because there are so many unique solutions. And so that question of scale, that question of processing, that comes from an institutional lens about what kind of food is prepared and presented and who makes those choices. And I think that from our perspective, there's an opportunity to perhaps redefine what good looks like, and therefore then what the criteria for that I'll use the language of the supplier relationships look like. So maybe that helps a little bit with the conversation in the room, but that's definitely one of the things that's very much on our minds about how our organization may partner with you and others here to have an open, honest discussion to really start to codify what we mean by mobilization, how that looks, what it takes to sustain, build, and what people actually define as value that's created as a result of it, in terms of volume of food, in terms of pricing and economics, but also in terms of health and nutrition, wellness, knowledge and education, and agency. I hope that helps a little bit here.
Yeah, but that's a great comment. Thank you. And the comment reminds me of some of our findings during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown. And that is that hubs or organizations really had to pivot, right? Because the institutions were closed and not providing meals in that way. And so there are, a number of alternatives came up. But having a diverse customer base, so institutions and households, seems to be a part of the mix that's really effective for food hubs to be successful, right? That you serve multiple markets, and that can be a challenge. I think that the smaller scale, and precisely, right? And we need to define, okay, like what is the goal that we're trying to achieve? And who are the right customers that we want to serve? And so the scale needs to match those customer needs, but thinking about balancing the profitability of your entity, might need to have some larger buyers to offset. And so that's certainly something that is high on our minds, and it's something that we see in the work. But I think there are a couple of things in the chat. Ileana,
Yeah.
would you like to pick up one of those? Or
of course. So Carla is, I'm going to read your question, but if you're comfortable coming up, we'd love to hear more from you. Carla is sharing with us that I'm pivoting from community member and food producer to a grower. My ultimate goal is to become a distributor by establishing a fresh food market in my community. The difficulty I face is how to start that market. Carla, are you able to share, is it specifically like resource constraint or just guidance? Having an
resource
okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No. Hi everybody. Resource constraints and basically, how to get started. Right
Mhm.
now, I am in the hatcheries sprout incubation program. So that
Mhm.
helps me with pivoting my bakery to a more impactful, in a more impactful way. So I can hire the exonerees and the ex offenders when they come out. So I have guidance on that part, but it's, I, of course, any business plan also has like intermediate and longer range goals.
Mhm.
And, it's like while I'm garnering information for an immediate reopening, I'm already looking to the next 3 to 5 years and what it looks like. And it's, I'd like to start gathering that information out. I don't know if I need to, reach out to the I'm sorry, the fresh market that is opening or probably has already opened over in I think it's Austin or Garfield
Mhm.
Park, where
Mhm.
the grocery store pulled out, and so they were like,
Yeah.
we're gonna make our own.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
No, that,
exhausting.
yeah, no, that's, yeah, I think so. And I think so. I'm gonna, my first take is like, I think that, recognizing that challenge that's real, like knowing where to start. And I think that, one of the things that I cannot speak from the, you know, the producer perspective or your lived experience, but I think that definitely one of the resources that comes to mind, and just because Deepa just spoke, is hopefully having this community food navigator could be a great resource in like putting those that question that need out into the open and have the opportunity to like gauge that from the community. I think the other part is I'm thinking of the organizations, like the wraparound organizations. So I'm gonna bring in Michelle, who asked on like the second question of like they're an environmental nonprofit and they're not necessarily a vendor, but they are trying to figure out how do they fit in. So I'm thinking organizations either adjacent to Michelle that are focused on like scaling from where you are right now into like what's the next feasible step for you. Make like personally is like what seems what the connection that needs to be built is necessary. So hopefully my answer is like hopefully there'll be a platform and hopefully there'll be organizations like Michelle's that are joining the conversation that can appropriately connect you to like really think through like what are those next steps that are gonna make it viable for you from where you are and what your um, capacity is in terms of supplying or creating these connections with this market looks like. So, but I'm happy to connect offline and I'm sure that there's folks here that I'll open up for them to answer that question that you have in like how do you go ahead and you know move like the information and the resources to move into that space. I open it to any of us that have spoken or anybody else that hasn't that has some resource as well on this.
Thank you. I appreciate that because, moving forward, I don't want to just, start that, but, also work with some type of collaborative form where the blueprint is available and, we can serve as supports for other communities because it shouldn't just be, one community on the west side or, one pocket on the south side. We should be able to pop up,
Yeah.
and so that these chains can't, keep pulling out like this Aldi
Yeah.
over on 76, in Ashland. This is like, okay, at this point, clearly we see that we need our own.
Yeah. Absolutely. I
And we need an incubator. The same way I'm able to go to the hatchery, for incubation for a bakery, we should be able to have an incubator or some type of collaborative to help communities become more sustainable.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's as hubs definitely we're not the end all be all, but we can serve as that connector. And I think that we're definitely, I'm not the only hub here, but I'm hopefully, can be that resource, even if may not be the right person. And again, I think I'll let Deepa or Westlin chime in if they have any other builds, or again, anybody else on some of the Carla's question.
Carla, I think something that is our underlying and like fundamental goal of like these mixers and events is to like voice these are some obstacles that I'm facing, and this like wide array of different people who are sharing those obstacles and sharing those struggles, but also have connections to various resources that can support that. And if enough of us are having like shared obstacle, then that theme is available, so that we can start like voicing that and saying like, okay, now we need to directly find these gaps. And within this room already, we have researchers, we have common market hubs, we have technology advocates, and ways that we could like integrate what are like our obstacles and opportunities and like bring them all into the space. So that's like the biggest part of the mixer. So thank you for uplifting that, and just sharing like specifically like what are some of those challenges, because other folks may be facing that as well. And so we got examples like the one that you mentioned in Austin. We see in mine with the Green Fresh Market, just different versions of like what it looks like to like run a grocery store and like have it be like community based and going forward with that. But in these events right here, hopefully you're able to make it on Monday too. I don't know if you signed up or not, but if you are able to make it on Monday, there'll be other people who are experiencing that as well, and we'll be able to have some real-time conversations with different ways that we can support one another and establishing some of those models that you mentioned.
Thanks so much. No, I didn't sign up for the in-person on Monday, but I think I will after this.
Oh yeah, we got room for you. So come on.
Thank you.
And if I can add, I know that one of the things, and this is in response to Janice's comment in the chat about challenges being funding for brick and mortar, as well as the licensing process. And so I know that SIFPAC is doing some work trying to provide tools and resources to provide information for people to navigate that process. We also have the Chicago Regional Food System Fund. So there are more and more funding opportunities that are being made available to producers of color. Again, I know I just saw the USDA opened up a grant opportunity for urban agriculture. And so that seems like it's promising. So I think there are, potential grant opportunities that we're seeing that folks can apply to, either for farming businesses or food-related businesses that they can access. In hearing you talk, Carla, it made me think about, maybe we need like a resource directory for the funding that's available for different types of enterprises and can help folks be guided through that process. Like I love the idea of an incubator space for food farming businesses for Black and Brown Indigenous producers.
All right, and I think so. I want to do a time check. We have a few minutes left, and I want to address. So Michelle was asking about, they're an environmental nonprofit, and they wanted to understand how they're not a creator, they're not a vendor, but they want to understand how they can fit in. So one of the things that we are very self-aware in terms of like the operations that we do at the Con Market is that we are, again, a connector. So we don't have all the resources. We don't administer technical resources ourselves. So for us, it's very important that the regions that we're a part of, we're aware of organizations like yours, so we can understand what could be the points of convergence. Because if, for example, I meet a grower that may be doing conventional agriculture and is interested in going into, creating more sustainable practices in their growing, or converting part of their space into less more environmentally friendly practices. Like, I'd like to connect with you to see, okay, what kind of resources do you have? How can we partner to support this grower? Because it's not something that's easy to the con market to have somebody that can literally do that. But we, again, love connecting and providing the resources to the folks that we work with and folks that approach us. How can we help advance through the work that other organizations are doing? On occasions, and depending if it's on a project by project case basis, like, we'll figure out, is this an opportunity to create proof points, to create points of visibility of like how this should be more thoroughly invested. Like, we've done that also in the past, that we've partnered in specific projects with organizations to create pathways towards, whether it be policy or investment, or organizations that want to get a sense of what does it look like to do XYZ part of this work. We've also done that before. So that's kind of how I perceive like partnership, or like how organizations like yours could be more incorporated in this mobilizing food aspect. I don't know, Wesleyan, or if anybody has any other additions to that. All right. Well.
Also, I'm sorry, really quick, Eliana. Also, we have like the Rhizome network, where like everybody from like various backgrounds and disciplines, and just ways that they want to access these conversations, they could just jump in, and it's a ton of intersection in various ways, how Eliana outlined as well. Like, so we'll follow up with everybody with like various resources that CIFPAC holds that people can engage with as well. So
I just want to riff off of you, Dakari, and just say, you know, as the navigator, Wesleyan just made this reference to a directory of some kind for the resources. So this is one of the things that we are right now in process. We're in closed development with about 100 folks. And we're talking with Dakari and Roger and Marley and all of the organizers here about how we extend today's conversation, so that things, Carla, you're talking about, how do I connect with others who are trying to solve for sustained local, fresh and distributed food in my neighborhood, that those conversations continue. So we will be back in touch with the different forum and mechanisms by which we're trying to build this network together, in solidarity here with everybody, figure out how to do this.
So I'm trying to see, I know that I want to make sure, Janice, did we address your question on funding? On the challenges side? I'll go with, okay. All right, so we have just a couple of minutes, and so if there's anything, again, that, you know, looks, that's from here, that would be, you know, helpful in terms of what we've shared, like Wesleyan and I have our information at the end of this presentation. But before we close, we'd like to hear on the upside. You know, we talked about the challenges with the minutes that we have left. What type of services and support do you think you might need in a distribution partnership? Like, what are the specific things? And I know some folks highlighted things right now, but does anything else come to mind in addition to what you've mentioned? Okay.
I was just going to say that, Carla, if you do come to the in-person on Monday, please do look for the Community Food Navigator table. We'll be there. Sydney and I, who's in the room as well, will be there, and we'll learn more about the work that you're doing. And that goes along with everybody else in the space. please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one thing that I dropped, I'll probably message Carla, but what I just dropped in the chat is it's a copy of our producer manual, a guide for growers and food businesses that we created last year, and it's constantly under development. But how I was mentioning before, that, you know, Carla lifted voice to an issue that Carla is experiencing. Do that more often. And so like, if like by doing that, we're able to like begin some research and looking into what's what. And so we could like just identify like what we found in that document that I just shared, and update it so that it is somewhere where it's like just it's incubated in this document that's like constantly changing, and it's constantly, you know, going to be developed by you all who are experiencing things on the ground. So that's just an example of like what all we've identified so far. But, you know, feel free to reach me or anybody within this call and just like share and have conversations and, you know, just stay in the loop with Wesley, Eliana, Deepa, myself, you know, just so we can know what's going on. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us in this conversation, and available as needed. And I'll be there Monday. So if you see this familiar face in a colorful shirt, then please feel free to introduce yourself, and love to have a conversation as well.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Dakari, any instructions for what's next?
We're about to break out into lunch, and so you know, have some good lunch. But also, we'll be having a virtual vendor fair, which is going to be on the WebEx Socio platform. And so we'll be doing that for about an hour, I believe. Let me see, just to verify. About an hour and a half. So 12 to 1:30, we'll be coming back. And when we do come back, we'll have 3 different breakout sessions. One is for minority women and veteran-owned certification, food safety for wholesale markets, plugging into promotional food weeks. And that'll be going on from 1:30 to 2:15. So I hope to see y'all in the breakouts. And then we'll be lastly closing out with inspiring connections, best practices, and local food systems relationships, which will be led by Eliana Bahati and others such as Aman, Midwest Foods, et cetera. So super excited about that.
Great, thank you. Hope to see you all soon.
Bye.